The Boston Molasses Flood remains one of the strangest and most haunting disasters in modern urban history. A catastrophe that seemed almost unbelievable at first yet caused very real destruction and loss of life. On January 15, 1919, in the north end of Boston, a massive steel storage tank suddenly burst and released more than 2 million gallons of molasses into the streets. What followed was a deadly wave that moved with surprising speed and force, turning an ordinary day into chaos. The tank was an enormous structure, about 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, and it stood close to homes, businesses, and busy streets. It was owned by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, which used molasses to produce alcohol for industrial purposes. At the time, demand for alcohol had been high during the war, and production remained strong even after the fighting had ended. The tank had been filled many times before, but there were warning signs that something was not right. People who lived nearby often said the tank leaked, and some even collected dripping molasses in small containers. There were also reports of strange sounds, like groaning or creaking, coming from the metal walls. Despite these warning signs, the tank was never properly tested or reinforced. Later investigations would show that the steel walls were too thin and that the structure had not been built with enough care. Rivets were not strong enough, and the design could not handle the pressure inside. On the day of the disaster, the tank was nearly full, and changes in temperature may have increased the pressure even more. Inside the tank, fermentation of the molasses could have created gas, adding to the strain on the already weak structure. At around 12:30 in the afternoon, the tank suddenly failed. Witnesses described a loud, deep roar as the metal split apart. In an instant, a huge wave of molasses burst out, rising as high as 25 feet. The wave rushed through the streets at an estimated speed of up to 35 miles per hour. It hit buildings with great force, knocking some off their foundations and crushing others. The sheer power of the moving liquid caused destruction similar to a flood or even an explosion. The neighborhood was crowded at the time. People were outside working, walking, or enjoying a break in the middle of the day. When the wave struck, there was little time to escape. Some people were hit directly and killed by the force. Others were swept off their feet and carried along in the thick liquid. Unlike water, molasses is heavy and sticky, and this made the situation far more dangerous. People who were caught in it found it almost impossible to move. As the wave spread, it began to slow and thicken in the cool air. What had been a fast-moving surge quickly became a heavy, sticky mass that trapped everything in its path. People struggled to breathe as the molasses covered them. Some were pulled under and could not escape. Horses, wagons, and parts of buildings became stuck, adding to the confusion and danger. The streets turned into a thick, dark mess filled with debris and cries for help. Rescue efforts began quickly, but they were extremely difficult. Firefighters, police officers, and local people rushed in to help, only to find that moving through the molasses was slow and exhausting. It clung to their boots and clothes, making each step a struggle. In some places, rescuers had to use boards or ladders to avoid sinking into the sticky surface. Even simple tasks became hard, and it took great effort to reach those who were trapped. Divers were brought in to search for victims beneath the surface, but the conditions were very challenging. The molasses was thick and dark, making it hard to see or move. Some rescuers became stuck themselves and had to be pulled out. Even so, they continued working for days, trying to save anyone they could and recover those who had died. In total, 21 people lost their lives, and more than 150 were injured. The victims included workers, children, and others who happened to be in the area. Some died right away from the impact, while others died later after being trapped or injured. The loss was deeply felt in the community, and many families were left grieving. Cleaning up after the disaster was a huge task. The molasses covered streets, buildings, and equipment, and it was not easy to remove. Workers used water from fire hoses to wash it away, but this only spread the sticky substance further in some cases. It took weeks to clean the area, and even then, traces remained. People said that the smell of molasses could still be noticed long after the event, especially on warm days. The disaster quickly became widely known, and many people were shocked by what had happened. At first, some found it hard to believe that molasses could cause so much damage, but the facts made it clear that this was a serious and deadly incident. Attention soon turned to the company that owned the tank and whether it had been responsible for the failure. Many lawsuits were filed against the company, leading to a long and complex legal case. Experts studied the tank and the events leading up to the disaster. They found that the structure had not been built or maintained properly. The company was eventually held responsible and was required to pay money to the victims and their families. This case became an important example of how companies could be held accountable for unsafe practices. One of the most important results of the disaster was a change in safety rules. Before this event, there were fewer checks on large industrial structures. After the flood, stricter rules were put in place to ensure that tanks and other facilities were designed, built, and inspected more carefully. Engineers were required to provide detailed plans, and regular inspections became more common. These changes helped prevent similar disasters in the future. The story of the flood has remained part of history because of how unusual it was. A wave of molasses destroying part of a city is something that few people could imagine, yet it really happened. Over time, it has been remembered in books, films, and discussions about strange events. It is often used as an example of how unexpected dangers can arise from everyday materials. There are also many personal stories from those who lived through the event. Survivors spoke of the sudden noise, the rushing wave, and the struggle to stay alive. Some described how the molasses pulled at them, making it hard to move or breathe. Others told of helping neighbors and strangers, working together to escape or rescue others. These accounts show the human side of the disaster and the courage of those who faced it. Experts have continued to study the flood to understand exactly what caused the tank to fail. They have looked at factors such as pressure, temperature, and the strength of the materials. One important idea is that gas formed inside the tank due to fermentation, which increased the pressure. Combined with weak construction, this may have led to the sudden break. These studies have helped improve knowledge of safety and engineering. Today, the place where the flood happened looks like an ordinary part of the city, but a small marker reminds people of what took place there. Visitors may not notice it right away, but the story remains an important part of local history. It serves as a reminder of the lives that were lost and the lessons that were learned. What makes this event so memorable is the contrast between the material involved and the damage it caused. Molasses is usually seen as harmless, even pleasant, yet in this case it became a deadly force. The disaster shows that even simple things can become dangerous under the wrong conditions, especially when proper care is not taken. In the end, the Boston Molasses Flood stands as a powerful example of the need for safety and responsibility in industry. It shows what can happen when warning signs are ignored and standards are not followed. More than 100 years later, it continues to be remembered not only for its unusual nature, but also for the important lessons it provides about risk, planning, and the protection of human life.